Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. We got 112 folks in here already, and I'm sure more folks will be joining us. Again, welcome to our session. A few housekeeping rules. First of all, I'm Reggie Henry, CIO and Performance Excellence Officer here at ASAE. And obviously, this topic is of interest to a lot of us. So thank you for being here. If you have questions, feel free to either put them in the Q&A or put them in the chat area. My good colleague, Amy Hisrich, will be manning both, as will I, as we go through this session here. My guess is that this session is going to move along at a good clip. We were doing the pre-session for it. It certainly did. So be aware of that. A lot of people have called me in the last 2 weeks since we posted this, asking me what was ASAE's official stance on AI, in particular generative AI. Well, I will tell you that our official stance is probably the same as yours right now. We're in learning mode. We're convening our members to have discussions about it. We're convening the best minds we can find to talk about all the issues, both technical and non-technical. And this is one of those sessions. We did a session a few weeks ago where we were kind of talking about the uses or potential uses of generative AI. And there were a lot, and the chat went crazy with a lot of non-technical issues. So that's why we're having this session. We'll be convening more sessions in the near future, but that's our official stance. We're learning along with everyone else about this. Luckily, we have some associations who are in the information industry who are paying close attention. I've had some conversations with some of them, and one of our colleagues who you'll learn from this morning is from one of them. So with that, I am going to ask each one of our panelists to introduce themselves and in a couple of sentences about why they think this conversation is important. So I'm going to go in clockwise order on my screen. So Sarah, if you would start us off, please.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are. Hi, I'm Sarah Tagan, and I lead the journals publishing group for the American Chemical Society. I'm based here in sunny Washington, D.C., and I see a couple of my ACS colleagues online, so shout out to them. ACS is a big nonprofit. We're founded in the 1870s by charter of Congress. We have about 170,000 members of the society. We publish 80 primary research journals. So for us, artificial intelligence, large language models really sprang out of the ether. It felt like about 6 months ago, and for us, we can see a lot of opportunities, but a lot of challenges. So I'm pretty excited to talk about what we think about how large language models are going to serve us better in publications.
Stephen?
Hi, I'm Steve Smith. I'm a research professor of robotics at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. I'm also currently serving as president-elect of the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence. This is the technical society that serves the research community. And with the sudden emergence of tools like ChatGPT and other generative AI systems, this topic is certainly top of mind at the association. I'm sure you've seen the news with some major calls for alarm, I guess would say, and we, one of the missions of our association is really to promote the responsible use of AI. So while we recognize that any technology, there are opportunities to apply it in good ways and in bad ways, we're very much interested in kind of steering and guiding the successful and useful application of AI technologies.
Thank you, Stephen. Jeff.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jeff Tenenbaum. I am managing partner of the Tenenbaum Law Group. We're a four-lawyer boutique law firm based here in Washington, D.C. that exclusively represents associations and other nonprofit organizations as outside counsel. We deal with a very broad array of all of the different legal issues facing associations and nonprofits. I've been doing this my whole 27-year legal career. And like any other new technology, new developments, there's always implications for associations, and there's always legal implications. And being the token lawyer on the panel, I'm here to speak about some of those legal risks. And as I always try to do, focus on practical solutions for how to mitigate those risks and protect your association while using and taking full advantage of and making the best use of AI.
So Jeff, you're not the token lawyer on the panel, you're the lawyer on the panel.
Whatever you want to call it, Rich.
So a couple of things as we start this conversation. One is that we're well aware that with any new technology that has come into our space or come into anybody's space, and as Stephen mentioned, there's some pros and cons. And I think we have to figure out as we move through the understanding and testing of these technologies, is it net good, is it net neutral, or is it net bad? I mean that's our job in doing that. And I'm going to just go through a couple of examples of things that I have done recently that have saved me time, but also gave me pause. So not too long ago, we were doing one of our AMS demo days. And so I said, let me just check with ChatGPT and ask it, what are some considerations I should have for selecting an association management system? Well, first of all, I was a little blown away that it even knew what an association management system was, because some associations don't know what an association management system was. But I'm going to share my screen really quickly and show you what it came up with, if I can. And I hope you can see that on the screen. Sarah, can you see that on the screen?
Yes, I can.
This list of things making sure that you do an adequate needs assessment, make sure you worry about the user friendliness of the technology, and make sure that it has the appropriate integration capabilities, and make sure you're aware of and test the security issues with that particular systems, and make sure you remember to do great support and training for your staff, and make sure that the technology is scalable, is a good starting list. It really was. And so I was able to take that and have some conversations with it, with some of our colleagues that were there selecting association management systems. What it gave me pause was that wasn't a complete list. And every time I've used ChatGPT, I get a starting point. I get an assist, if you will, on whatever thing I'm working for. The second kind of real world application that I did, Microsoft has a tool called AI-based tool called Copilot, which is there to kind of help you generate code for applications. So I went to Copilot and using natural language said, I want to develop an application to monitor contracts that ASAE have so that we can enforce deliverables. That's just the exact code that I put in there. It not only generated an application for me that was pretty right on, it generated test data for me to use to test whether or not the application was working. And then I submitted that code to it and said, please document this code. And it did all of that. And I went back and said, how long would this have taken me? It probably would have taken me 3 or 4 days to get to the point where it got to in about 10 minutes, okay? But there were some pieces of the code that were wrong. It certainly didn't pay attention to usability and all of those kinds of things. So there still was some work for me to do. But that's how I view AI, is this assist that it can give me in terms of doing the work that I do. So I'm going to ask my colleagues a number of questions here to kind of start this discussion based on a kind of discussion that we had. And Sarah, I'll start with you. I am scared to death for people like you who are responsible, as you said, over 80 research journals, and the kind of havoc that could be caused in some cases, maybe being caused by AI. So my first question for you is, what are the biggest opportunities for generative AI you see in publications? And my second question is what keeps you up at night about that?
Yeah, sure. So been thinking about this question a little bit. And so I think an obvious opportunity in the publication space is to be able to do very quick summaries of articles that we publish, right? We have a stable of, I don't know, 60,000 articles or so that we publish every year. Wouldn't it be great to be able to provide some lay language summaries to people, or say, ChatGPT, please write a summary of this article that's fit for a 12th grader or someone who's skilled in chemistry. And I think that helps an association like ours broaden our reach, which, you know, when we're talking about federal government funding for science, anything that we can do to make science more accessible to the broader public can only serve us better in terms of what the government, what the public thinks about science, right? We're a little under threat these days. So I think providing some accessibility in ways that if we had to have humans write this is just unattainable for us. We can't afford to do that. I think some other things that generative AI can do for us is to perform some of the routine screenings of manuscripts that come into us for evaluation. You know, is funding information complete? Do they acknowledge the proper things? Do they have the proper permissions? All of those kinds of things that right now I have an army of people who are doing. So if I can take some of that burden off of those people, I can put those resources into doing things that only humans are capable of doing, right? Looking at those edge cases, you know, deciding, is this piece of research something that's really novel or is it really routine? That's something better that a human can do than an AI engine. So I want to use people for what people are really best at. I want to use machines for what machines are better at. And then the other opportunity that I think is really there is the potential to connect our users across different functions within the association. We have an annual meeting. A lot of people submit abstracts to that. We know, right, that people who submit abstracts also submit papers to our journals. I'd love to be able to figure out how I can better connect those different hats that people are wearing and use that to get them to submit articles to our journal at the same time as they're submitting abstracts. Our systems just don't talk to each other very well right now. Your point about this is a good one, right? And so I think connecting our users with the different hats that they wear in different parts of the association are some great opportunities for us. Thinking about what keeps me up at night. The biggest one, flooding the zone with a fake content or fake data. How are we going to combat that? How are we going to be able to detect it? And what does that do for public trust in science? But what does it do really to the literature? I think it's got the potential to really pollute the literature an awful lot. So how do I, as a publisher, help weed out the garbage from the good stuff? And I think that while it concerns me a lot, it also represents an opportunity for us. I think too, some other concerns that are keeping me up at night, and I bet you Jeff is going to talk a little bit about this more. What's the licensing around how you can use content? So articles published by ACS either have copyright transferred to the American Chemical Society or licenses to authors under a CC Creative Commons license of a couple different flavors. Does ChatGPT have the right, the authority, the legality to be able to use that content in what ways? So those are a couple of things that keep me up at night. A couple of things where I think AI can help us even more in the association world.
Good. So Stephen, I'm going to turn to you next, especially in your role as being a board member of the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence. Is there specific guidance that the association is giving its members on the appropriate use of AI, but also what's keeping you up at night about this as you move forward?
Well, certainly the association, AAAI is the sort of acronym that we use. Certainly is trying to provide guidance to the membership and more generally to sort of look at opportunities to constrain or focus research in different ways. One area, just kind of relating to the publishing that we've just and AAAI has its own publishing arm, AAAI Press, and we, along with a number of other research journals, have recently sort of revised our publishing policy to explicitly exclude AI systems like ChatGPT from being co-authors on papers and or legitimate sources for information. And part of the reason of that is not that they aren't helpful; they're extremely helpful, but they are infallible, or they aren't infallible. They're as Reggie was mentioning, you get a good a lot of good start, but and it's amazing at first glance to a layperson, but if you look at the details, very often it's making statements and claims that just are not true at all. So the issue of misinformation is real, and the research community is continuing to work on that, but that's not something that's going to go away. I mean, it's there's a tendency to ascribe intelligence to these tools at a level of that there's this underlying understanding of the semantics of the world, and in reality, it's a statistical model that's been built by training on hundreds of thousands of pages of text or things, and it has no real understanding of what is, but it's learned correlations and associations, and it can put those to amazing use. And just a kind of a cautionary tale, I guess, that I think Reggie said it well. It offers tremendous opportunities to streamline your time, to provide super assistance, but it's you've got to recognize that it needs it's not going to replace what you have to do, and there are some serious issues, I think, with respect to how you use that. Issues of plagiarism, if you're thinking about publishing or writing things, with respect to the information that is learned from, there are lots of issues like that. So one, I'm sure you've all seen in the popular press, there's some major figures that have come out and calling the alarm and that we should stop AI. And certainly, I think that's the wrong way to think about it. There's so much benefit to get out of that, and it's really, I think, the application of AI that we need to think seriously about, and think about what kind of controls, how do we go about sort of regulating the responsible and safe use of AI. And that's going to vary from application to application. If you think about applying AI in the medical domain, or medical diagnosis kinds of areas, that's quite different than applying AI to create autonomous driving vehicles. So there's no cookie cutter solution, I think, to that, but what we really strive to do is really sort of to look at how we can in different application domains, how we can take action to sort of secure and promote the safe and responsible use of AI.
I think that your last point is just so well said, that this is not a cookie cutter thing. You can't apply guidelines to all the things, general guidelines to all the things. It's really going to be more on a application by application basis. Jeff, I've gone from, I oftentimes say I'm a reluctant technologist, even though I've been doing technology all my life, but I'm also an early adopter, and those things might seem to be in conflict, but I don't think they are. With that as a backdrop, Jeff, what are you hearing from your clients? What kind of concerns are your clients having right now? And from a legal point of view, I guess I'm going to ask this question, but then have you do whatever you need to do with it. are the copyright and liability and all of those kinds of concerns different with AI, or are they just kind of exaggerated with AI? Because I'm thinking about times when I've gone to the internet, for example, to do research. I still have to be aware of the sources of this stuff. I still have to be aware of not misusing somebody else's information. So that's my question, but have at it, sir.
Thanks, Reggie. So first off, ASAE just recently published an article of mine called 5 Key Legal Issues When It Comes to Generative AI on April 27th. I think Amy's going to post a link to that article in the chat. So the things that I'm going to be talking about here in summary fashion are discussed in a little more robust fashion in that article. Second thing, just a real quick side point, Sarah, that's a great idea about using generative AI to make summaries of articles. I just, on my to-do list is American Bar Association Business Law Today is publishing an article of mine about non-compete agreements. And whenever they publish my articles, they ask me to do like a bullet pointed summary of it. It's anything has to do. And that's a great idea. And then I can edit my own summary. So thank you for that suggestion. Next point I want to make is that the legal issues involved with AI are not new legal issues. I mean, I remember back even when I was working at ASAE and going to law school at night, it was kind of the advent of what they called listservs back then. They don't really call them that anymore. ASAE uses collaborate forums and whatnot, but the same idea where, message boards, where members can communicate with each other in different subject matter areas and whatnot. And I remember writing an article about, all of the various legal risks involved for associations in using listservs. And as I think about it, really some of those core legal areas, core legal issues are really still the same. They just have different applications with AI and different kind of ways to view them and consider them and different ways to mitigate those risks. So when I was writing that article that I just mentioned, I kind of thought through it all and came up with kind of 5 key legal areas that are probably most important to consider when it comes to AI and generative AI. They're certainly not the only legal issues. I could probably come up with 10 or 15, but these to me for associations, of course, this, like Steve was saying, it's different in different industries, but for associations, these are probably the 5 key issues as I see them, just my opinion. One is data privacy. And again, this is really nothing new and different. Associations have had privacy policies for years. We always advise clients that you need to tell members how you're going to use their sensitive confidential information and how you're not going to use it. And you have to follow your own rules. If there are applicable international, federal, or state privacy laws, you have to follow those as well. None of that has changed with AI. But you have to be especially cognizant of it because, for instance, when you put data, any kind of data into a generative AI platform, it's gone, it's out there, it's going to be used and reused by many people many times over. So you have to be especially careful of what you input into a system. And so any data that's personal in nature, data that constitutes a trade secret, data that's confidential or privileged, or data that cannot otherwise be disclosed to third parties, you have to be very cognizant of that. Now, there's nothing different about that or putting that kind of data into a listserv or other things like that. But it's really important. It's really important to be cognizant of that. Intellectual property and copyright in particular, it's a key issue. So for instance, if you're going to use AI like a ChatGPT platform or something to create, some ideas for an article or a white paper or whatever else you might put out, keep in mind that under US copyright law, you can't, it's illegal to register something with the Copyright Office unless it has been it has to be a product of human creation and it has to be an original work of authorship. Something that comes from ChatGPT is not the subject of human creation or an original work of authorship. So if you generate something, don't go ahead and throw it into your magazine and then register that with the Copyright Office. Now, if you want to use it, like Reggie did and others do as a starting point, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but you have to sufficiently modify it if you want to claim copyright as your own. As with everything else, as with other, with listservs and with anything else, you want to make sure that you're never infringing other people's copyright rights whenever you're putting things into an AI system. And you certainly don't want to put in anything into a platform that's subject to a non-disclosure obligation or that's privileged or whatnot. Another one that's really interesting, and probably one that a lot of people haven't thought about, is discrimination. So AI systems can inadvertently perpetuate bias and discrimination, particularly if they're trained on data that reflects historic biases or inequalities. And so associations have to ensure that their AI systems do not discriminate on the basis of any protected characteristics. So for instance, I was reading an article in the Washington Post a few weeks ago that was talking about how large employers are increasingly using AI systems to help screen applicant resumes and even to analyze recorded job interviews. It's apparently a growing trend. I don't think it's widely used in the association world, but it may be in the future. But if AI penalizes candidates because it can't understand their accent or a speech impediment, for instance, this could lead to illegal employment discrimination. And so while it may only become illegal in certain contexts, like in the employment context, it also could create discriminatory effects in other settings. So if you're using it, for instance, for volunteer leadership selection or other sort of membership sorting, or trying to screen potential candidates for, volunteer leader positions, if you end up using a platform that has some discriminatory effects, well, that might not be illegal, it's certainly very problematic. Fourth area that, again, a lot of people probably don't think about is tort liability. So tort liability, torts are a class that all law students take in the first year of law school. And what it basically means is liability that comes from someone causing harm to someone else. And one of the areas where we've always dealt with tort liability risks in the association world is when it comes to standard setting. So a lot of associations set standards, either just they set standards generally or as part of a certification or accreditation program. And if you are using AI to help you determine what standards to set, and then it ends up that those standards are deficient, that they're not reliable, they're not accurate, they're not complete, and that ends up causing harm to someone, that can cause potential tort liability to the association. So if you're going to use AI as a starting point in connection with any of your standard setting activities, you have to make sure that everything that you put out there is very carefully vetted for accuracy, veracity, completeness, and efficacy. And then finally, the fifth area, it's not really a legal area, but it certainly involves risk management, and that's insurance, right? You can never stop someone from suing you. You can never protect against all claims, but that's why you have good insurance. You can't insure for all risks. There are certain things that are just not insurable. But what you want to do is you want to minimize the coverage gaps in your insurance. We do this all the time. Again, this is nothing new. I work with associations all the time to analyze their insurance policies and figure out where there are coverage gaps. Now, most of your associations probably have directors and officers liability insurance, commercial general liability insurance, and cyber insurance. But that may not be enough for some of these risks, like the tort liability risks I talked about. Your D&O policy is generally going to exclude coverage for those sorts of claims, especially if it involves personal injury or bodily injury or property damage. And so what you want to make sure you look at is work with your insurance broker to make sure you have sufficient coverage. You might need to secure what's called an errors and omissions liability insurance policy, sometimes called media liability insurance, to cover some of these risks that are not covered elsewhere. If you're like Sarah's group and you have a big publication activities, your publication related claims are generally going to be excluded from your D&O policy. So you want to make sure you have an E&O or media liability insurance policy to mitigate those gaps. So those are the 5 areas. And then what you're going to want to do is make sure that you create appropriate policies, procedures, protocols for the use of AI by your staff, by your volunteer leaders and others. And then you want to codify that in things like employee handbooks, in contracts with staff, with contractors, with members, even in your agreements with volunteer speakers, authors, board and committee members, because you always want to codify these things. It A, helps to prevent problematic legal issues from occurring in the first place, and B, if something problematic does occur, it helps to protect the association from liability risk. So that's a long answer to a short question, but hopefully that was helpful, Rich.
It is helpful. So I've got a couple of questions, and I'm going to get some questions from the audience because I see some popping up in the chat and Q&A here. But Jeff, you started off your conversation by saying these issues of liability and privacy and data security aren't new. They've been around for a while. So I'll ask you and then ask my other colleagues to comment too. Why do we think the alarm has gotten to such a level that people are starting to think that these issues are new?
Well, I mean, I read all the mass media coverage of this stuff as well, and I don't know that the legal concerns are really the most top of mind for most people. I think a lot of the alarm bells that are being sounded are very real. I mean, I'm a big fan of generative AI, and it's not going anywhere for associations. There's no doubt about it. But it has to be used wisely and in a way that mitigates risks. I don't view the legal risks as being the most critical ones, but I think they're important ones. Like for instance,
Absolutely.
Early on in my career, I remember writing some articles about copyright infringement and basically saying just because you find something on the web, on the internet, doesn't mean that you can just copy and put it in your newsletter or your magazine or on your website or in your weekly bulletins or something like that. That just because it's freely available doesn't mean it's not subject to copyright protection. And if you use it without permission, unless it constitutes fair use, it can constitute copyright infringement. But however, if you just link to that article as opposed to copying it, that's a way to mitigate those risks and copyright infringement. The same basic principles apply here as well, with generative AI. It's just a reminder that in this new world of AI and how associations might be using it, you have to pay attention to these risks. But they're really nothing new.
Sarah?
Oh, I'm not sure that I can add on to what Jeff has really said there.
Okay. I'm thinking about, Sarah, a couple of things that we've covered in this conversation. And one of the things that Jeff brought up, and I'll remind the people that the topic heading said generative AI, but there's plenty of other kinds of AI, and Jeff went through some of them as he was giving his conversation. Sarah, what have you had to do in the last, say, 6 months when you're reviewing people's submission for journal entries, for example? How have you had to change your work or work style or things that you consider?
Yeah, that's a fair point. And like Steve was saying a little earlier, we in February released a policy that codified that ChatGPT or other generative AI models are not capable of being authors on papers. We also probably need to update our guidelines to reviewers, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the point that Steve made about, like, if a reviewer says, "Hey, summarize this paper for me in a positive light or in a negative light," and they stick it into a large language model, that information is now out in the wild, which would be for us a violation of some of our confidentiality around peer review. So we gotta do some fixing there. The other thing too, like when Jeff talked about discrimination, that was really interesting. So a couple of years ago, we were messing around with some AI algorithms in-house and trained a data set on papers that had already been submitted and published in our journals. Looked at, I think we fed into the system titles, authors, affiliations, abstract, kind of the top part of an article, and then queried against our corpus of submitted material and said, hey, which of these are going to be acceptable, or most likely be accepted within our journals? And when we looked at what the results were, the thing that the data set was trained on was the affiliation of the authors, right? So if you were from Harvard or MIT or Stanford, it was a lot more likely that your paper was going to get accepted. And that discrimination, right, or that bias was real and we obviously shelved that very quickly and said, no, this is not something that we can possibly use. But that propensity for bias is totally there. And that's, something we've got to manage, I think, as we move through this brave new world.
Yeah, Reg, if I can just add on to what Sarah just said. First off, that's exactly what I meant, with an example, Anisha, I called it the heading discrimination, but bias. And even though in that context, like what you just described, there's nothing illegal about that, but it's very problematic. And that's not something that your association, that's not how you want to operate. Right. And another point that you raised is the issue of kind of codifying this, like you were talking about in like your agreements or whatever you have your reviewers sign. You want to make sure that whatever your rules are, this has to be your own original work. Like, for instance, we work on, draft like author and speaker agreements for associations all the time, for volunteer authors and speakers like you guys have. And one of the things we always put in there is what's called a representation and warranty, that this is your own original work, that if you've incorporated others' works, you have appropriate copyright license to do so, that it doesn't infringe anyone else's copyrights. And, you may want to, we haven't actually done this yet for, in the stuff that we've worked on with clients, but I'm sure we will, be putting a reference in there to AI, that if you either, I think I saw someone in the chat ask a question about whether, people who are writing, technical papers and things for your association should be banned from using AI. And that's certainly one approach. But if you're going to allow people to use it, you want to make sure that there's a rep and warranty that, if AI was used, that the person, did a thorough review, everything was carefully vetted, it wasn't just left as is. Let me, I want to share my screen real quickly. When we were having our planning call, I put into ChatGPT, what are some potential applications for AI in the association world? And about 10 seconds later, this is what it came up with, right? And this is good stuff. There's no question about it. But is this a complete list? No, not even close. And it's just a good example, for instance, on the tort liability issues that I was talking about earlier. If you're going to be relying on generative AI to generate things like this, and it's going to be an incomplete list, that's potentially problematic. So you just can't be relying on that. And as associations, you always, with legal risk, we're always doing a lot of risk shifting. And when you're relying on content coming from volunteers and paid contractors and consultants and others, what you want to do is make sure that they are very carefully being regulated, and they have appropriate reps and warranties to make sure that they are telling you that they've done the proper vetting, that it doesn't infringe anyone else's copyrights, things like that. So if liability does later occur, they might be held liable, but it's going to be increased. It'll be very unlikely that the association will be held liable.
So one of the things that's coming out in this conversation, and I hope people just remember this one simple thing. These public generative AI sites like ChatGPT are just that. They're public. And so keep that in mind, not only when you're putting information in, but when you're getting information out, they're public. The second thing that I will say about them is that any one of these generative AI engines has been trained with some content, okay? And in most cases, you don't know what content it's been trained on. You assume some things about it. And I'm saying that for two reasons. One is you can use generative AI and train it on your own content, for example, as a kind of an experiment, and see what large language models have to do, how they work with using your own content. So Stephen, I want to get you back in here for a second here. Again, in your official role, if you will, are there, based on the conversation you've heard so far, and if folks are starting to ask this in the chat areas, if I were to ask you, what are the top 3 things people should have as guardrails, if you will, if they're considering walking down the AI path for the first time?
Well, I think just, I think first and foremost, just to keep in mind that these tools, are fallible, and you've got to keep that at top of mind all the time. I think, going back to a question that you asked earlier, why is the temperature so high, and that you have this sort of alarm bells going off and all that. And I think that, it really, AI technology has shown the ability to do some amazing things, and to really generate intelligent kinds of behavior. And as that, as you compare that to sort of, I don't know, accounting programs or something like that, the stakes are much higher as to sort of what you might imagine could be done both positively and negatively. And I think that's why, the concern is raised. I think we're still kind of learning or trying to understand what the best way to, exercise control or to regulate these kinds of technologies. It's as a researcher myself, it is sometimes frustrating to me that the computing resources required to build these models are such that only a few tech companies are capable of doing it, basically. And you can, as say a university researcher, really have the computational horsepower to do these kinds of things. So that's the thing, I think, an issue where globally, where ultimately I think potentially the government needs to get involved. That's not unique to generative AI. I mean, they sort of missed the boat with social media, but it's the same sort of thing. It can't be totally unconstrained. I don't know. It's a great question. Personally, I think just be wise that it's a tremendously useful assistant, as you mentioned at the very top, and a good way to get started on things and make more efficient use of your time. But you have to be riding on top of it all the time and cognizant of what it's producing and being diligent and kind of looking at the accuracy and being accountable for it. That's yeah.
No, I was going to say I've changed one of my long-term things that used to guide me, which was I used to say trust but verify. Trust but verify.
Exactly.
And now I'm in the verify but then trust mode, which is a little bit of a flip here.
Reggie, can I just comment on a couple of things I saw in the chat? First off, in terms of trust but verify, someone posted that their use of AI in their government relations department, they treat all AI work product as if it were like the product of an intern. So everything gets really carefully vetted. And I think that's a great practice.
So if that's the case,
Yeah,
is that making more work? Is that making less work? So one of the things I'm concerned about is what does this do to the workflow of the association at some point in time?
Yeah, there's no question that
Right.
it's going to, it's going to supplant some human work product. There's no question. And if it ends up making associations more efficient in the process and needing to pay less for staff or have too fewer staff people, that's not necessarily a bad thing overall, and at least in my judgment. But look, a lot of people are asking about policies. You talk about guardrails. And like everything else, now I'm the lawyer here, and so it's not surprising to hear me say this, but I think associations need to develop good written policies for the use of AI. One policy for staff, maybe one policy for speakers and authors, volunteer speakers and authors, one policy for like subject matter experts, and maybe another, because they're all going to have different wrinkles to it. Maybe one for volunteer leaders, like committee members and folks on a standard setting committee and things like that. Because when you have good written, clear policies that say what you can and can't do and what sort of protection should be built in, again, it helps twofold. It helps to ensure good behavior that mitigates legal risks from happening, bad things from happening, and second, it helps protect the association in the event someone does act badly, helps to protect the association from liability. And some people asked if ASAE could help develop some model policies in this area, which I think would be a great initiative, and happy to work with you on that. But I would just stress that there's not going to be a model association AI policy, one size fits all. There's different aspects and different elements, how staff use it is going to be very different from volunteer leaders. And so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I'm going to jump to a couple of questions I see here, and one that just struck me came from Shruti, and it says, "Can you accidentally be using AI technology at work and not know about it?" My answer is you absolutely could. So
I would say that too. Yes.
That I suggest that people do is you audit all of the technology companies that you're using to do your work and ask them, are they using AI in that particular tool, and how and why? And you need to know which of the tools you're using right now are using AI to process your members' data, to make suggestions. Jeff, you brought up an example, and I did a test a couple of years ago in using a tool that was supposed to screen resumes, for example, based on criteria that I put in. And I did that. And then I separately, went through the resumes myself to see what I would have come up with. And the amount of bias that I saw come out of that tool scared me to death. And so you probably are using tools right now that are either AI based or have an AI assist, and you need to know.
Yeah, I know some associations use, various software platforms to help them with their volunteer management, especially associations that have, hundreds and hundreds of volunteers to try to, figure out who they are, to identify new candidates, to identify people who might be good candidates for elevated leadership positions and things like that. And if AI is being used as part of that tool, and even if it's not, there's potential bias built in there, and you really have to be cognizant of that.
Yeah. So another question I see in here, that's being asked, and I think you already answered it, Jeff, was that if I feed a copyrighted article into one of these public generative AI things to develop a summary or whatever you decide to do, is that content now available to be used in other contexts? So for example, might ChatGPT use some of that to answer somebody else's question?
It's a great question, and the short answer is yes, it is going to be available for others to use. And so, if I put that article, it's actually a very good point. And now as I think about it, maybe I will not be using I write my bullet pointed summary of my non-compete article, because once I put that article in there, it's out there. Now, do I have the permission to do that? Yes. Although, sometimes it's not the case. When I wrote the article about AI legal issues for associations, and ASAE sent me the publication agreement, the license agreement. It's a non-exclusive license agreement, but it gives ASAE the right to publish it first. And so I needed to make sure that, they were the first one to publish it. I later had it published, by Nonprofit Times and American Bar Association, but I made sure it was after. And so a lot of times there's exclusivity, like with Sarah's group. And I know a lot of the stuff, it's going to be an exclusive license or an assignment of the copyright. Other times, you might agree that the author won't have it published anywhere else for a year or something like that. And if you're putting it out there, it's gone. So you may have the right, because you own the copyright, to do it, but yeah, you absolutely run the risk of copyright infringement and violating exclusivity rights and things like that.
A couple of things, folks. I see some questions in here that people put in the Q&A that I think they meant to put in the general chat, so I'm going to copy them over there because they're asking, has anyone? So for example, Kristen asked, has anyone looked at how to use AI for translations? And Amy, I think we used an AI-based product at one of the global summits to do something. So you might answer that question in the chat as well. But if you've got questions that you want to ask all the participants, pop them into the chat area, and you might get some feedback there. So we've got 10 minutes left in this conversation right here, and each of us answers questions long-windedly. So I'm going to ask each of us to do, if I were to ask you, and I think we've covered some of this, so this might be summary kinds of stuff. If you were brought into an association and asked to start an AI practice, if you will, in your association, I'm going to start with you, Sarah, because you're kind of in that mess right now. Where would you start? What kind of guardrails would you set? What kind of inducements might you do to the staff to test and practice? But how would you start the AI practice in your organization?
Man, nothing like a small question there. Gosh, where would I start? I think with an audit of where AI is already being used within the confines of my organization, and then in other like-minded organizations to sort of understand what the playing field kind of looks like. Boy, I would get really friendly with guys like Jeff Because I think that the legal ramifications, not just US law too, but I saw somewhere in the chat or the question and answers about like what about European law, right? So you need some international representation there too, especially if you're a global organization. I think you'd probably want some experts like Steve, right, who's a researcher on this. And I think you put some people in a room and you say, like, first, maybe let's think about some of the what are the values that are really important to us as an organization, and use that to help figure out what some of the policies are, and then you make those public, right? Because if you just keep them to yourself, like there's no good in doing that. So that's kind of how I'd start that question. But boy, that would not be an easy lift, and one that I'm not super excited that I'm going to have to take on, but I'm going to have to take it on.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I think all of us are going to have to take on this. You know, I'm struck about the similarities to this in something like a GDPR policy, where how you use information, especially your information about your members, especially personally identifiable information, how the laws are so uneven country to country and even state to state. And that's still in its infancy in terms of trying to make some national law out of it. So
yes, and let me interject there. It's likely that the EU is going to be, the first to regulate AI. They've already been actively working far ahead of the US. And so just like GDPR has had effects on associations, use of member data and other things like that, whatever regulation comes out of the EU, is going to have an impact as well. And so, for instance, if you're using AI to help sort and analyze member data, right? And you just need to, once you put it in there, it's out there for anyone to use. And so if you've told your members through your privacy policy and whatnot that you're not going to share certain of their data with any other third parties or only in certain contexts, once you put it in there, you violated that policy. So keep that in mind. And then in terms of policies, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the AI platforms' terms of use. So we've dealt with kind of terms of use, for social media platforms for years, a lot of legal implications there. Every one of these generative AI platforms has their own terms of use. You'd be shocked if you read through there what those things say, including once you put everything in there, you are giving them essentially a broad, non-exclusive, worldwide, unlimited, perpetual, royalty-free license to use that content in any way that it wants. And a lot of other things in there. So just be sure to be cognizant of those platforms' terms of use. Most people never read them, never pay attention to them, but they have significant legal implications for your association.
Yeah. Just general rule of thumb, folks. Don't put your members' information in a generative AI. Just don't do it. Find some other way to sort and analyze the damn data. I'm sorry. So Stephen, if you were starting an organization, how would you start, and what kind of guardrails would you put in place?
Well, I think the points that have been discussed make sense. It's sort of common sense, thinking about what you want to protect and all that, and making the appropriate policies. I think that's a great start, and I think that's I'm also sort of listening to the tone of this conversation, and I think I'm coming away with that. Man, this is too much. This is a can of worms. I just want to put a lid on it and never look at it. But I think on the other hand, there's a tremendous amount of value to be gained from these technologies, and in terms of savings, more efficient work, just on and on. And I would just say, don't be afraid of it. Take the steps to make it, to protect, what you think needs protected. But, the faster you can jump into it, the more benefit you're going to get out of it. And, things will sort out. I mean, if you think of this newest line of technology, these generative technologies, they've emerged within the last 6 months, and still, everybody's sort of still reacting to it and sort of understanding how to best take advantage of it and protect against bad actors, things like that. But that's going to get sorted out. And, there's tremendous benefit to be gained by this technology. So I just, put in a plug for that don't be scared away because it's a challenge. There are challenges to be sure, but there are great opportunities as well.
I'm looking, I see Patty, and Patty, thanks for this comment, because I was thinking along the same line. She says, funny how this came back around. Where was all this conversation with IBM Watson? Living by the rule of using AI for good to unlock productivity and innovation. And I'll tell you, Patty, that one of the things Steve sent me in behind the scenes when we were having our first conversation was the code of ethics for the AI Association. And it spoke to those various things. So Steve, is it okay if I at some point share that code of ethics with this group?
Definitely. I mean, that's
okay.
Something we're proud of. Yeah.
That code of ethics gave me things to think about. I'm in the process of crafting something for our staff in terms of how to think about not only these AI technologies, but how we use our technologies in general. And it had a lot of those kinds of things in it. I'm trying to see if there's any other kind of question we can ask here to kind of end this conversation here. Beth Sermon said, this is all making me think that AI is like a chainsaw, a very useful tool, but dangerous if you don't know how to use it correctly with the proper precautions in place. And I don't know if I'd call it a chainsaw, Beth, but you're probably right on there.
Well, over the years, other AI technologies, were, sort of remarkable when they first appeared, and then have sort of worked their way into everyday use. And now you would never even think to even call it AI. It's just part of
Right.
normal tool set that people use. These generative models are a step further, certainly an innovation, but a larger step into sort of free-form intelligent behavior. So,
Jeff, Stephen, one other question for you, because right now these generative AI tools are either free or near free for the public to use.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned earlier, the computing capacity that's needed to make these things run is astronomical. And the more people that get in there, the more space, the more capacity they're going to need. Do you see these things being free much longer, or do you think there's going to be some costs that are unreasonable and maybe even create a larger divide in terms of people's ability to be able to use these tools?
I don't know if I don't anticipate there being big costs being introduced, but I think the bigger issue is the control, and the technology being controlled by a small number of companies who are able to financially make it happen, basically. So that's where I think some appropriate government regulation could help.
And there already are some paid versions of these various platforms.
Yeah.
Yep. And my fear with that, Jeff, just like my fear is with a lot of technologies that have become invaluable to society in some ways, there continues to be a divide in terms of the people who can use them and people who can't use them and who can afford them. So I'm hoping we're not going to get there. Well, we're at the 11 o'clock hour. I want to thank my panelists, first of all, for being here with us and giving us very invaluable information. I think what I've heard from these panelists is that there's plenty of things that we need to be concerned about with using AI, in particular generative AI. And Jeff outlined some of the legal issues, and Stephen talked about it from a developmental point of view, and Sarah certainly talked about it from a content point of view. I guess what I will leave you with, and I didn't think about it, so thanks the audience for this, is you should know which tools are being used in your organization right now that have AI built into them. You should know, so please do that audit. You should also know which staff members are experimenting with AI that you might not have known about, so you should do that sort of audit too. But I think the overall feeling is this has some net positives and some net negatives, and we just need to keep exploring. Last final thing is, if you haven't started down the road of developing some guidelines of use for your staff, you should, and for your volunteers who often work in staff capacities on your organization's behalf. So with that, I'm going to ask our audience to give our panelists a virtual round of applause, if you will. And we'll see you down the road. Obviously, this is not the last discussion we'll be having about this. And again, our official policy is to educate and educate and educate about this. So guys, thank you so much for this conversation.
Reggie, thanks for having me.
Great, my pleasure.
having
Yeah,
us.
thank you.
Really
Great day,
appreciate
everyone.
it. All right, folks, see everybody down the road.